everybody, my name is Alexis Spivak, and today I'm going to tell you about Typhoid Mary, Captive to the Public Health, which was written by Judith Walter Levitt. I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of an introduction about the main character of the book. Her name was Mary Malone, also known as Typhoid Mary. Mary was an immigrant from Ireland who came to America to make a living as a cook. The families that she worked for, she was known as an excellent cook, and once she arrived, she did not go unemployed for a long period of time. So one of the things about the 1900s is that people didn't really wash their hands very well or at all after they used the restrooms. So one of the ways that typhoid, which is a bacterial infection, can be passed is through feces. So because Mary Malone was a cook and she might have had feces on her hands as she was cooking food for the different families, she was able to pass on this disease to other people. However, we don't know exactly when Mary Malone contracted typhoid fever. In fact, she probably didn't know exactly when she did either, because she never experienced the symptoms of the disease. So she was an asymptomatic carrier of the bacteria associated with typhoid fever. So once people started getting sick, there was an investigator named George Soper who came looking for Mary Malone so that he could test her feces. When he entered her home, she ordered him to leave and came after him with a fork. She was not very cooperative. Later, she was arrested and she was sent to isolation on North Brother Island. And then about 2 years later, after being completely isolated, she was released with the stipulation that she could not cook for families any longer. So I believe that she became a laundry woman. But later, she didn't like that job. She wanted to cook, so she went back to cooking, and she infected some more people. So then she was sent back to North Brother Island for the rest of her life, where she passed away in isolation in 1938. It is known that she infected 51 people over her lifetime. So Levitt writes her book in a very interesting manner. It is broken up into 7 different chapters, and each of the chapters has a different perspective. I'm just going to touch on a couple of the different perspectives. The main points of each of the chapters is located on the PowerPoint slides, but there's just some that stick out a little bit more than others. But the first chapter is on the authority in new science of bacteriology. This was very, very important because the study of bacteria was brand new at the time. So the investigators were using labs to check Mary Malone's feces for the typhoid bacteria, and Mary Malone was also sending off her own feces to a different lab to check to see if it was also carrying the typhoid bacteria. So the results from the 2 labs were different. So this shows how it was a brand new science and how it has developed over time, which has been really great for the United States society and around the world in the common day, so that we're able to see how different diseases are continuing to go along. The second chapter was on public policy makers. A lot of the public policy makers believe that the healthy carriers were menaces to the public health. The important quotation that came out of this section was that the difficulty in eradication of typhoid is not in the sick bed patient, but rather the healthy carrier who goes blithely on his way distributing his infection. So the policymakers wanted to focus not on the people who they already had in isolation in the hospitals, but rather the people who were continuing to be out among people and make food and interact with them and pass the diseases on to the rest of the population. This third section was on the law and lawyers. Okay, this one was also very important because it focused on whether or not forcible quarantine be extended to healthy people and whether such people could be kept indefinitely. This comes into play with the Greater New York Charter, specifically sections 1169 and 1170. These sections and provisions that come with them are: the Board of Health shall use all reasonable means for asserting the existence and cause of disease or peril to life or health and for averting the same throughout the city. Said board may refer cause to be removed to a proper place to be by design. Any person sick with any contagious or infectious disease shall have exclusive charge and control of the hospitals for the treatment of such cases. This charter played a huge role in the 1909 legal proceedings with Mary Malone, which stated that her liberty could be taken away in the name of protecting the public's health. This is when they ruled that she could be in isolation for the rest of her life if she continues to be a cook and to make other people sick. The fourth section of the book dealt with social expectations and prejudices. This is where George Soper also comes in. He believed that women were the more dangerous carriers of typhoid because of the role that they played within the family and within the home. His very nice quote was that the first thing to be learned in the case of Mary Malone is in the matter of cooks. Who is your cook? Has she ever had typhoid? George Soper didn't believe that men could be a huge dangerous carrier of typhoid because of the role that they played in the family and how they weren't the ones who were creating the food. So he was very, very against Mary Malone ever being released because he believed that she was the most dangerous person in America. The fifth section of the book dealt with media, which is also a huge thing in today's society. So the first public use of the term Typhoid Mary was used in 1908 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. If you look at the slide, you can see that the T in typhoid right here is not capitalized, as it normally is in today's culture. It is not capitalized because in this first public of the term, it was not meant to give her a new name. It was meant to describe a disease that she had that was to be associated with her. Another important part of the media came with William Randolph Hearst's newspapers. There is an image of Mary Malone with a skillet, and in that skillet she is placing skulls. In the book, Levitt describes this image because it is a very powerful image. She says, "The picture is more powerful than the text that accompanies it. Certainly the image is hard to dispel, even today. Just like today, its contemporary viewers keep this image before them and refer back to it repeatedly. The characterization of Mary Malone as inhumane, a devil in the shape of a woman, was powerful. It made people uneasy. Who would want to eat in her kitchen? Mary Malone, an immigrant woman, domestic, has turned the ordinary task of cooking into a death-producing act." Everything that William Randolph Hearst posted in his newspapers was very dramatic. He loved to make a story, so he definitely focused heavily on the fact that this was an immigrant woman from another country, obviously, who was just making very many people sick. The next section dealt with Mary Malone's perspective, and this was kind of a sad section to read because of how she began to think of herself. So in the quote that stuck out from this section was that she says that she has been kept like a leper for the past 2 years with only a dog for company. She said food has been shoved through the door 3 times a day by a nurse who immediately ran away. So one of the things that people don't always think about is that Mary Malone didn't think she was a bad individual, which is why she was also uncooperative with the investigations. She had no idea when she picked up typhoid fever, so why do all of these people think that she's passing it on to 51 other people? To her, that's completely mind-blowing, and she feels as if she would never be part of society again because of something that accidentally happened to her. And then lastly, the seventh section deals with a frequent retelling of Mary Malone's story. This kind of goes from the early 1900s when Typhoid Mary was going on, all the way to today's time, because of how we still have the term Typhoid Mary in our culture. So now, if you hear the term Typhoid Mary, it's not really in regards to typhoid, it's in regards to a woman or a man who is passing a disease on to other individuals. So this could be as simple as the common cold. So if my grandma gets me sick and then I get my mother sick, we could refer to her as Typhoid Mary. So it was interesting in this section to see the positive and the negative stories that are being retold about Mary Malone. Depending on whether the individual thought that she was a menace to society, that she believed she was doing this on purpose, or the people who believed that she was innocent and it was just a bad situation. So like I mentioned before, this is where my personal perspective is going to come into play, as well as the policies that kind of came from the story of Typhoid Mary. As I mentioned before, she wasn't very cooperative with the whole investigation and the people, all the testing. And while I don't really agree that they should have isolated her, I am one of those people who believes that there is a way to teach somebody about what is going on that might make them understand, so hopefully they could have been more cooperative. But this was in the early 1900s, and that's not very so if she had been more cooperative, I do believe that there would have been a way that she could have kept living her normal life and not have been in isolation for the entire end of her life. So as I was doing my research and reading this book, there weren't actual policy names that came up in regards to what happened after Mary Malone and Typhoid Mary. But there were two things that kept repeatedly popping up into regards of things that had changed. So two things had changed. The first one is that there was a better understanding of healthy carriers of disease. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the PowerPoint of the presentation, in the early 1900s is when the study of bacteria really began. So since then, we've been able to look at how different types of people carry the diseases and how it's in their blood and throughout their bodies. So this was the beginning of that change in society. The second thing that changed is that people started having better hygiene because they realized that if they had feces on their hands, that they could get other people sick, and it was really disgusting on its own. So once it was found out that you could pass on diseases like typhoid and other diseases from your body through hands, and like touching other individuals, they learned how to use water much better. So that was definitely a big change that occurred. And then lastly, this book, Typhoid Mary, Captive to the Public's Health, was heavily reviewed. Everything that popped up was a review on this book, or they all made reference to Levitt's book. Everybody knows the basic story of Mary Malone, even if they don't know him. They've heard the words Typhoid Mary. This is due to just common knowledge, as well as to the references that are still popping up in our popular culture. So just a couple of the reviews that I read and just little notes about them. The first one was by Imperato, and it said that Levitt's attempt to demonstrate that Malone was treated more harshly than other typhoid carriers. This was definitely probably true, just because, like we've mentioned many times now, Mary Malone was not very cooperative with the investigations and all of the things going on. And it wasn't necessarily because she was a woman or an immigrant. There was another individual named Frederick Morsch, and he was cooperative, and he ceased working with food handlers, and so he removed the threat to the public health. However, when he went back to vending ice cream for 13 years, after he was identified as a typhoid carrier, he was also sent to isolation on North Brother Island. The second review was by Lerner, and this kind of pops up in all of the different stories in regards to anything in history, but there was a variety of ways that Mary Malone had been described, whether that was her hair color or how she was built, but there are very wide descriptions and variety of descriptions in regard to how she truly was. The next one was by Carson, and this was one where Carson wished that Levitt had delved into this more and wanted to know more about the changes in the healthcare practices. I also would have really liked to know more about the healthcare practices that changed post Mary Malone, but like I mentioned in the slide before, a lot of it had to do with better hygiene as well as the increase in studying of the different types of bacteria. And then lastly, the quote by Feldberg was that Malone also symbolized much more: the domestic, the outsider, the woman who disrupted an American order. I thought that this was an important thing to bring up because Feldberg was one of those individuals who would continue to push Mary Malone into the public health category of being a menace. But there are such a wide variety of individuals who don't believe that she was. So I think that Levitt's book does a really great job of showing all of the different perspectives of individuals and society and prejudices that come about with different diseases. And Feldberg just shows one of those perspectives. And then lastly, here are the references of all of the different things that I use. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I would be more than happy to answer them for you.